The restaurant was quiet that evening, filled with soft music, candlelight and the clinking of expensive glasses. People spoke in gentle tones, laughing politely over their fancy meals. The place was famous, where rich people came to show off their power without saying a word. Darius walked among them like a shadow, silent, respectful, always alert. He was a black waiter in his early 30s, tall and calm, wearing his neatly pressed uniform like it was armor. For 6 years he had worked at this restaurant, never late, never rude, always professional. He had learned to smile even when insulted, to bow even when ignored, because in this world people like him were seen, but not truly seen. He carried a tray of empty glasses with one hand, balancing perfectly as he moved past expensive suits and sparkling jewelry. Then he saw him, table 9, the man who made the entire staff nervous the moment his reservation appeared. Preston Vale, billionaire investor, known for yelling, for tipping big if obeyed, and destroying reputations if displeased. He was alone tonight, dressed in a deep navy suit, silver cufflinks catching the light every time he moved his hands. Darius approached carefully, already sensing the tension. Preston didn't even look at the menu before snapping his fingers twice, like calling for a dog. Darius reached the table with a polite smile. "Good evening, sir. May I get you started with something to drink?" But before the sentence even ended, Preston raised his voice. "Water, still, with lemon. You don't have ears or what?" he barked. The words hit Darius like a slap. Not the volume, but the way they were said, like he wasn't a person. A few nearby diners looked over. One woman gasped softly, but nobody said anything. Darius stood still for a moment, blinking, feeling the heat rise in his chest. He had been spoken to badly before, but something about this moment felt different. Preston's eyes were sharp, full of power and disrespect, like Darius was something stuck to his shoe. And in that quiet pause, just a second or two, something shifted inside Darius. He could feel every eye on him, waiting to see what he would do. Would he nod and walk away like always? Would he lower his head and keep quiet? But he didn't. He looked Preston Vale in the eyes and said in a calm, clear voice, "Sir, would you like to be treated the way you just treated me?" The restaurant froze. Every knife stopped cutting. Every spoon hovered above soup bowls. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but the sentence hit harder than any scream could. Preston's face twisted, confused, like he couldn't believe someone like this had spoken back. Darius didn't raise his voice, didn't move his body, just stood straight, like a soldier. For a few seconds, no one spoke, no one moved. Even the music felt quieter. Then the whispers began, small, soft like wind before a storm. "Did you hear what he said?" Someone near the corner whispered. "That waiter, did he just say that to Preston Vale?" Another man said in awe. Even the bartender leaned over the counter, forgetting the drink he was mixing. Preston blinked, lips opening and closing, searching for something sharp to say, but finding nothing, because the words Darius had spoken weren't rude. They were honest, clean, clear, and undeniable. "Would you like to be treated the way you just treated me?" That single question, said with dignity, suddenly made the powerful man look very small. Preston grunted, shifting in his seat, pulling on his sleeve like something itched beneath his skin. Darius didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just added gently, "I'm here to serve you, sir, not to be spoken to like a thing." Someone near the entrance gave a quiet clap and then stopped, unsure. A woman near the window smiled and whispered to her friend. Finally, someone said it. Preston tried to straighten his shoulders, to reclaim his power, but the moment had already slipped from his hands. He waved his hand in the air and said, "Just bring the water," in a much quieter tone. Darius gave a slight nod, turned and walked toward the bar, leaving a trail of silence behind him. People watched him, not because he was a waiter anymore, but because he had become something else. In that one moment, he had become a mirror that showed people like Preston the ugly truth of their own reflection, and the whole room had seen it. Darius reached the bar, placed the order with calm hands, and let out a long breath. He didn't regret what he had said, not one word. He had spent years swallowing his pride, hiding his feelings behind smiles and yes sirs. But today, something broke free, not in anger, but in truth. And the truth was this: everyone deserves to be treated like a human being, even a waiter in a black apron, especially a waiter in a black apron. And now, the entire restaurant knew it too. Darius stood at the bar, waiting for the lemon water like it was just another drink. But everything had changed. People weren't eating, they were watching him, whispering behind napkins, stealing glances, trying not to be obvious. The room was full, but suddenly it felt like a courtroom, and Darius had just made his statement. He didn't yell, didn't argue, he had simply asked a question. Would you like to be treated the way you just treated me? That one sentence was echoing inside every person's mind, like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Preston Vale sat at table 9, completely still, his fingers tapping nervously against the polished table. For a man known to control boardrooms and silence critics, he looked but uncomfortable. He had never been spoken to like that, not in public, not by a waiter, not by anyone he didn't pay. And yet no one had come to defend him, no one had jumped in to scold Darius. Instead, people had nodded, some even clapped. The waiter behind the bar, Luis, leaned in and whispered, "Man, I've wanted to say something like that for years." Darius gave a half smile but stayed quiet. He didn't want praise, he didn't want attention, he just wanted to be treated like a human. The bartender passed him the glass of water with lemon, and Darius turned to walk back. His legs felt a little heavier now, not from fear, but from the weight of every eye in the room. As he walked, he could feel the tension rise again, like the restaurant was holding its breath. He reached table 9 and gently placed the glass down. "Your water, sir," he said calmly. Preston didn't look at him, just gave a small grunt, like his voice was hiding behind pride. Darius waited for a second, then turned to leave, but stopped when Preston suddenly said, "You're lucky I don't own this place." The voice was low, bitter, like someone trying to strike back without a weapon. Darius turned, not angry, not scared, just steady. He looked at the man and said, "Respect doesn't come from ownership, sir." And with that he walked away again. This time people didn't whisper. They stared, wide-eyed, like they had just witnessed something rare, a moment of truth in a world built on pretending. The mood in the room had changed, not just because of Darius, but because someone had finally said what many had always wanted to say. In the far corner, a young woman pulled out her phone and began typing quickly. A tweet went out. A billionaire snapped at a black waiter in front of everyone. The waiter calmly asked, "Would you like to be treated the way you just treated me?" The whole room froze, dignity in silence. It started spreading instantly. Within minutes, more people were posting about it. Strangers in the restaurant, influencers sitting nearby, even the woman at the bar who barely spoke all night. Darius didn't know any of this. He was at the side station, refilling another tray of drinks, trying to stay focused. But inside, something felt different. He had spent years swallowing his voice, because he believed that was part of the job. He thought staying silent was strength. But now, he realized that speaking up with calm, honest words was even stronger. The manager, Angela, had been watching from her office when it all happened. She walked out slowly, heels clicking on the floor, expression unreadable. She found Darius near the kitchen door and said softly, "What happened?" Darius took a breath and explained everything without emotion, just facts. Angela nodded, eyes thoughtful, and said, "Go back to work for now. I'll handle the rest." Darius wasn't sure what that meant, but he trusted her. Angela had always been fair, but at table 9, Preston was fuming quietly, checking his phone, trying to call someone, but no one answered. He looked around the restaurant and saw it clearly now. People were watching him, not with fear but with judgment. That sentence still rang in his ears like a curse he couldn't shake. "Would you like to be treated the way you just treated me?" It sounded so simple, but it felt like a punch to the soul. The next server came by and offered the dinner menu, but Preston waved it off, stood up and threw some bills on the table. "Keep the change," he muttered bitterly, though no one had asked. Then he walked out, pushing open the door harder than necessary. No one clapped, no one booed. They just watched, as if a storm had just passed and left something peaceful behind. Back in the kitchen, Darius washed his hands, looked at his reflection in the steel panel of the freezer door. He didn't smile, he didn't cry, he just nodded to himself. He didn't know that his words had already gone viral, didn't know that strangers were defending him online, calling him brave, calling him a leader. He just knew one thing. For once in his life, he didn't swallow his pride to stay quiet. He had spoken with dignity, and the world listened. Darius didn't expect anything to change. He thought the moment would pass like others had before. Someone shouts, someone gets embarrassed, and then everything returns to normal. But this time it didn't. By the time he returned to the main floor with another tray of drinks, things felt different. Guests weren't laughing the same. They weren't looking down at their plates. They were looking up at him. Some smiled quietly. Others gave small nods, like showing quiet respect. But nobody said a word out loud. They didn't need to. Their faces said it all. We saw what you did, and we're thinking about it. Darius kept doing his job, table by table, step by step. But as he passed one group near the window, a man whispered, "You handled that like a king." Darius paused, blinked, and gave a soft, polite nod. He didn't want praise. He wasn't used to it. He was used to blending into the background. But now, it felt like every step he took left a mark behind. At the bar, two young women were replaying the moment on their phones. One had recorded part of it, just the sentence, his calm face, and Preston's stunned silence. They weren't mocking him, they were admiring him. She didn't even yell, one girl whispered to the other. That's what made it so powerful. Darius had no idea people were already posting clips online. He had no idea hashtags were forming. Dignity matters, waiter with words, respect is earned. But something was spreading, quietly but quickly, like fire in dry grass. The story was no longer just about one man being rude and another speaking up. It was becoming something bigger, a mirror people didn't know they needed. Back in the kitchen, the staff couldn't stop talking about it either. Louis said, "Bro, you're trending and you don't even have a phone in your pocket." Maria, one of the newer waitresses, smiled and said, "You made us all proud." Darius gave a tired laugh and shrugged. "I just said what I had to say." But inside, he could feel the weight of it. He had always been told to smile no matter what, to let it go, and don't cause trouble. But now he was seeing something new. What if speaking up wasn't trouble, but truth? Angela, the manager, came out of the back office, holding her phone, her eyes wide. "Darius," she said, almost breathless, "you're on the internet." He raised an eyebrow, confused. "What do you mean?" She held up the screen, showing him a short video already at 100,000 views. It was him, his calm voice, the question that silenced a billionaire. Even without knowing the full story, people were moved. The comments were flooding in. "Legend, best comeback ever, with class. I hope that Billionaire learns something today. This man needs to teach a masterclass in self-respect." Darius stared at the phone in disbelief. He hadn't done it for likes or follows or attention. He had done it for himself, to keep his head held high, even while wearing an apron. But now, the whole world was watching him hold it high. Across the restaurant, a woman stood up and walked over, maybe in her 50s, dressed in pearls and a long red dress. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I just want to shake your hand." Darius wiped his palm on a towel and reached out, unsure what to say. "You reminded us tonight that courage doesn't need to be loud," she said, holding his hand warmly. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Darius frozen for a moment. Something was happening that he didn't expect. People weren't just watching, they were waking up. They were thinking about all the times they stayed quiet when they should have spoken, all the times they saw someone get disrespected and looked away, and all the times they forgot that every person, no matter the job, has worth. By the end of the shift, every single table had tipped him, even those who hadn't been served by him. One table left a napkin with the words, "Thank you for your voice." He folded it and slipped it into his pocket like a treasure. Outside, night had fully fallen, and the air was cool and quiet, but his phone, usually silent, buzzed non-stop, messages from people he hadn't heard from in years. Old co-workers, college classmates, even his former manager from a cafe he used to work at. They all had one thing to say: "I saw the video, you were incredible." Darius sat on a bench near the bus stop, phone in hand, thinking. He had just wanted to do his shift, serve water, clean up plates, go home. But now, the world was different. Not because he yelled, not because he fought, but because he reminded everyone, in just one sentence, that respect isn't a reward, it's a right. And sometimes, all it takes is one calm voice in the middle of noise to wake up an entire room. Angela, the manager, sat alone in her office, phone in hand, staring at the video again. It was short, barely 20 seconds, but it had power. Darius's calm voice, the stillness in the restaurant, and that question, "Would you like to be treated the way you just treated me?" It was already everywhere. People were sharing it, reacting to it, writing about it. Angela wasn't surprised. She had seen something in that moment too, something different, something true. But now she had a problem, because her phone buzzed with another message from the restaurant owner himself. It read, "Call me, urgent, about Table 9 incident." Angela sighed and stood up, smoothing her blazer, then walked out of the office toward the kitchen. Darius was there, cleaning glasses calmly, humming a tune softly to himself. It was almost like nothing had happened, but everyone around him looked at him differently now. He wasn't just a waiter anymore. He was someone who had spoken the words everyone wanted to say. Angela walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "We need to talk," she said gently. Darius nodded and followed her into the back office. She closed the door and turned to him, her face serious but kind. "Darius, the owner called me. He got word about what happened." Darius stayed quiet, his face unreadable. "He wants to know if it's true that you disrespected a guest," she said carefully. Darius gave a small laugh, not out of joy, but out of disbelief. "I didn't yell," he said. "I didn't insult anyone. I just asked a question." Angela nodded. "I know, and you said it with dignity, but Preston Vale is not just any guest. He's powerful. He's connected." "I understand," Darius said quietly. "So what happens now?" Angela sighed again, then said, "He wants you fired." There was a silence, thick and heavy in the room. Darius looked down at his hands. He had done nothing wrong, but he could feel his job slipping away anyway. "If that's what it takes to keep the peace," he began, but Angela cut him off. "No," she said firmly, "I'm not firing you." Darius looked up, surprised. "You handled yourself better than most people would," she continued. "You didn't curse, you didn't cause a scene. You asked a question that made him uncomfortable, because it was the truth. But the owner," Darius started, but she interrupted again. "I'll deal with him. I'm standing by you, and you're not alone. Do you know how many people have reached out to the restaurant already? Hundreds. Some asking to meet the waiter, some saying they're coming here just to support you." Darius blinked, speechless for a second. Angela smiled gently. "You didn't just protect your own dignity, you reminded others they could do the same." Darius nodded slowly, feeling something warm in his chest, something like pride, but softer. He didn't speak for applause, but knowing he had people standing behind him made it feel okay. Meanwhile, outside the restaurant, Preston Vale was dealing with something he never expected. His phone had exploded with messages, and none of them were in his favor. Business partners were texting him things like, "What did you say to that guy? And you should issue a statement." Worse, some old interviews he had given, where he had mocked service workers and laughed about yelling at staff, were now being shared all over the internet. One headline read, "Billionaire known for bullying, faces backlash after waiter's viral stand." Another article called him the man who got defeated by a sentence. He threw his phone down on his desk in frustration. He wasn't used to losing control, but now the world wasn't listening to his money or his voice. They were listening to a waiter, and that made him furious. Still, he knew he had to do something. Later that day, a press release appeared online. Preston's team released a short message saying, "The situation at the restaurant was a misunderstanding. Mr. Vale respects all workers and deeply regrets any discomfort caused, but the damage was already done. People weren't buying it." One comment under the post read, "You're only sorry you got caught." Another, "Darius spoke more truth in 10 words than you have in 10 years. At the restaurant, Darius had returned to the floor, unsure if things would go back to normal, but as he walked to serve a table, a man stood up and clapped slowly. Then another person joined, and another. Soon, half the restaurant was applauding him, not for being a waiter, but for being a human who stood tall. Darius felt his throat tighten, but he smiled, nodding once. He didn't need to say anything more. The room already understood, and somewhere deep inside, even Preston Vale was beginning to understand too, that some people don't fight with fists or money or anger. They fight with truth, and truth spoken calmly can silence even the loudest man in the room. By the time Darius went home that night, the internet was no longer just talking about him. It was shouting. His name, his face, and his words were on thousands of screens. His short, calm question was now being posted with music, turned into quotes, printed on T-shirts. "Would you like to be treated the way you just treated me?" had become a viral phrase, but Darius didn't know that yet. He was tired, standing in his small apartment, still wearing his work shoes. He poured a glass of water, sat on his old couch, and finally picked up his phone. He had over 200 missed notifications, texts, emails, messages from numbers he didn't recognize. His friend Marcus had messaged, "Dude, you're famous. It's all over TikTok. You on the news tonight." His former high school teacher had written, "I just want to say I'm proud of you." His inbox had messages from reporters, podcast hosts, even big YouTubers, all asking, "Can we interview you?" Darius didn't know how to feel. He had always lived in the background, always moved quietly, and now the whole world was watching. The clip was everywhere, on Instagram Reels, Twitter, even Facebook, where his aunt from Georgia had posted, "That's my nephew, y'all." News channels started covering the story with dramatic music and bold headlines. Waiter's dignified words silences billionaire. A sentence heard around the world. One question that changed everything. On one talk show, a well-known host played the video twice, then looked into the camera and said, "That right there is what courage looks like." Darius didn't know how to respond to all of it. He wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't trying to start a movement. He was just a man who wanted to keep his self-respect while serving water. But sometimes, truth spreads faster than fire. Across the country, more waiters and service workers started speaking out online. They shared their own experiences, times when they had been yelled at, insulted, treated like machines. They used the hashtag Darius taught me, and slowly the story stopped being about just one man and one moment. It became about all the people who had been silent for too long. At the restaurant, the owner finally called Angela again, this time with a very different tone. "I've been getting emails non-stop," he said. "People are asking if Darius still works here. They want to tip him, meet him. One guy said he's flying in from Chicago just to shake his hand." Angela didn't say much. She just smiled quietly and replied, "I told you, he's special." Outside the restaurant, people began showing up, not for the food, but to see Darius. They asked if he'd be on shift, left letters, cards, some even dropped off small gifts. One child drew a picture of him with a speech bubble that said, "Be kind." It made Darius laugh and cry at the same time. He still showed up for work on time, still wore the same uniform, still cleaned tables and carried trays, but now he walked differently, not with arrogance but with freedom. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. He had already reminded the world that even quiet voices matter. Preston Vale, meanwhile, was living in a different kind of storm. His public image had been ripped apart by millions of strangers. His company's PR team was in full panic mode, trying to spin the story. They posted apologies, offered donations to charities, hired a crisis manager, but none of it worked, because the world had already chosen who they believed, and it wasn't the billionaire. People had seen the video, they had heard the truth, and it was too late to undo it. Even some of Preston's closest business partners began backing away. One company dropped his face from an event poster without explanation. Another removed his quotes from their website. He was no longer the powerful man sitting at the top of the room. He was the man who had been humbled by a sentence, and he couldn't stop it. In an effort to regain control, he tried something bold. He offered to meet with Darius privately. His assistant reached out. Mr. Vale would like to have a private dinner to clear the air. Darius stared at the message for a long time, then simply replied, "No need. I already said what I needed to." He didn't want revenge, and he didn't want to shake the hand of someone who only saw his worth after getting called out. Instead, he focused on the unexpected attention, some of it beautiful, some of it overwhelming. He agreed to appear on one interview, just one, on a small channel that focused on kindness stories. He wore his work clothes and spoke softly into the mic. "I didn't mean to go viral," he said. "I just meant to stand up for myself." The host asked, "What would you say now to people in the same position as you were?" Darius smiled and said, "You don't have to be loud to be strong. Sometimes one sentence is enough." The clip reached another 1,000,000 people in a day, and with every share, every view, every message, something became clearer. This wasn't just a story about a waiter and a billionaire. It was about every person who's been pushed down, looked over, and finally decides no more. All it took was one calm voice, one question, and a room full of silence that finally listened. Darius still went to work every morning, just like always. He still tied his apron, greeted customers, and took orders with a calm smile. But the world around him had changed. People came from other cities just to meet him. Some didn't even order food. They just said thank you, shook his hand and left. One woman teared up and told him, "You helped my teenage son find his voice. He watched your video 10 times. Darius would always say the same thing. "I didn't do anything special, I just said something honest." But deep down he knew it had become more than that. Strangers wrote poems and songs inspired by him. A local artist painted a mural of him outside a community center with the words, "Speak softly, carry truth." And then one afternoon something arrived that made Darius sit down and hold his breath. It was a letter, fancy paper, golden edges, and a seal he didn't recognize. Inside was an invitation. A university wanted him to come speak to their graduating class, not just attend, but deliver the keynote speech. Darius stared at it for a long time, unsure what to feel. He wasn't a speaker. He wasn't trained for this. He had never been to college himself, but the letter said, "You've taught us more with one sentence than years of books ever did. Please say yes." He showed the letter to Angela at work. She smiled, tears filling her eyes, and said, "You have to go. Say what you said that night, and just be you." So he agreed, even though he was nervous. When the day came, Darius stood on a wide stage, looking out at rows of students, professors, parents, and cameras. His heart beat so fast it echoed in his ears. He held the microphone tightly, hands a little sweaty, but when he started speaking, the room went still. "I don't have a fancy title," he said. "I'm not rich, and I don't wear expensive suits. I carry plates, I clean tables, I serve food, and one night someone treated me like I didn't matter." He paused, looking at the crowd, and I just asked him a question. "Would you like to be treated the way you just treated me?" The room was silent, hanging on his every word. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten. I spoke calmly, because I wanted him to hear me, not just with his ears, but with his heart. People nodded, some wiping away quiet tears. Cameras flashed, phones recorded, but Darius only spoke to the people in front of him. I learned that day that the world listens when truth is said with peace, not noise. And you, all of you graduating today, you'll face people who try to crush your spirit with power or pride. But don't forget, you still have your voice. Even if it shakes, even if it's just a whisper, use it. When he finished, the crowd stood up and clapped for a long time, not because he was famous, but because he had reminded them of something simple and powerful. After the speech, people lined up to meet him, professors, students, even a dean who said, "You've done more for human dignity than 1,000 speeches before you." Days later, job offers started appearing in his inbox. Companies wanted him to train staff on kindness. Schools invited him to talk to students about self-worth and respect. One even asked him to co-write a short book for young workers entering hospitality. Darius was overwhelmed but grateful. He accepted a few offers but made one rule: "I'm not here to tell people how to act. I'm just here to remind them to treat others how they wish to be treated." Meanwhile, Preston Vale had disappeared from the public for weeks. Rumors said his company had lost several sponsors and key investors. Some news outlets joked he was hiding from the internet. Others said he had entered a private retreat for emotional development. But none of that mattered to Darius. He didn't hate Preston. He didn't wish him harm. He just hoped he had learned something about being human, about respect. Back in the restaurant, things felt different now too. Other waiters stood taller, more confident. Management enforced stricter rules about how customers treated staff. They even placed a small plaque near the front door that read, "Treat everyone with dignity. Words matter." Every time Darius walked past that sign, he smiled a little, not because his name was on it, because it wasn't, but because the message was enough. At night, when he sat in his quiet apartment, he often thought back to that one moment, just a glass of lemon water, just a question, just silence. And yet, that moment changed his life. He didn't become rich. He didn't become a celebrity, but he became something more valuable, a voice people listened to, because it was honest, because it was brave, because it reminded them that we all deserve respect, no matter what apron we wear, or table we serve, or title we hold. And deep down, Darius knew that voice didn't come from fame. It came from years of being quiet, until one day he decided not to be. Weeks had passed since Darius gave his speech at the university. Life had become busy. His days were filled with quiet work at the restaurant, and his evenings with messages from strangers who thanked him for his courage. He still took the bus to work, still lived in his small apartment, still folded napkins with care. But now, every so often someone would stop him on the street and say, "Hey, I saw your video, thank you." It felt strange, but good. He didn't ask for fame, but he had accepted the responsibility that came with being heard. Then one morning, something unexpected happened. Angela walked into the kitchen, holding a formal-looking envelope, her eyebrows raised. "Darius," she said, "you've been invited to speak at the Ethical Leadership Conference downtown. They're honoring people who stood up for dignity in their workplaces." Darius took the envelope slowly, eyes wide. He had never imagined someone like him would be asked to speak at a business conference. People in that room wore suits worth more than his month's rent, drove shiny cars, shook hands with politicians, but Angela smiled, reading his mind. "They didn't ask for a CEO, they asked for you." He nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll go." On the day of the event, Darius wore the best clothes he owned, neatly ironed pants, a crisp white shirt, and a borrowed blazer. He walked into a tall glass building filled with cameras, reporters, and important faces. As he entered the main hall, someone guided him to a green room, to wait until his name was called. He sat alone, heart thumping, sipping water, trying to stay calm. Then the door creaked open, and a tall man stepped inside. Darius looked up, eyes narrowing slightly in recognition. It was Preston Vale, the same man who had yelled at him in front of a full restaurant, the same billionaire who once treated him like nothing. But now Preston looked different. He wasn't wearing his usual sharp suit. He looked tired, older, humbled, like a man who had been walking through a storm. He stood there awkwardly, then said softly, "May I sit?" Darius nodded once, cautious but polite. Preston sat down slowly, folding his hands together, staring at the floor for a long second. Finally he spoke, his voice lower than Darius had ever heard it. "I came here today, not as a speaker, not as a businessman, but as a listener." Darius said nothing, waiting, letting the silence do its work. Preston looked up, meeting his eyes, and continued. "What I said to you that day was wrong. It wasn't just rude, it was cruel, and I've carried that moment with me ever since." Darius tilted his head slightly, curious, cautious. "I watched that video again and again," Preston said, "and not because I was angry, but because I wanted to understand why your words hit me so hard." He took a breath, steadying himself. "You asked me if I wanted to be treated the way I treated you, and the truth is, I didn't. I never had, and that question made me face who I really was." The room stayed quiet, filled only with the hum of soft air vents and tension. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," Preston added, "but I just wanted to look you in the eyes and say thank you for waking me up." Darius finally spoke, his voice calm. "I didn't say what I said to hurt you. I said it because I needed to protect myself." Preston nodded, eyes shining slightly. "I understand that now." They sat in silence again, not as enemies, not as waiter and billionaire, but as two men learning from each other in different ways. Then a staff member entered the room and said, "Mr. Darius, "You're up in 5 minutes." Darius stood, adjusted his blazer, and turned to Preston one last time. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You just need to carry the lesson forward." Preston stood too, holding out his hand. "I will." This time when Darius shook his hand, it wasn't a handshake of power, it was one of mutual respect. When Darius walked onto the stage, the crowd welcomed him with loud applause, but he didn't let it change who he was. He spoke with the same calm voice, the same gentle truth. He said, "I once asked a man if he'd like to be treated the way he treated me, and I ask all of you the same thing now, not just in restaurants or hotels, but in offices, in schools, in your homes, because dignity isn't a gift you give, it's a right we all share." The room stood again, people applauding louder than ever. Backstage, Preston watched with quiet eyes, nodding slowly, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like a billionaire. He just felt human, and it was enough. Months passed, and the world didn't forget what Darius had done. What started as a quiet sentence in a crowded restaurant had turned into something far bigger than he could have imagined. It became a message that echoed across cities, countries, and even across languages. Darius's words were printed in articles, spoken in classrooms, repeated at conferences. "Would you like to be treated the way you just treated me?" Simple, honest, unforgettable. People began using the phrase in places far beyond restaurants, in hospitals, when nurses were yelled at by angry visitors, in schools, when students stood up to bullies, in office meetings, when someone was talked over again and again. It became a reminder that every person deserves to be treated with care, no matter their uniform or status. Darius never asked for fame, and he never chased it. He still worked part-time at the restaurant, though now he trained new staff on how to stay calm and strong under pressure. But most of his time was now spent helping others speak up. He gave talks at schools, helped design training for customer service jobs, and worked with youth centers to teach self-respect. He didn't come with big words or fancy slides. He came with one sentence and a story, and that was enough. People listened because they felt it. They felt the power in calm truth. They felt the strength in dignity without shouting, and they felt something else, hope. One day Darius received a small package in the mail with no name on it, just an address from another state. Inside was a letter and a small notebook. The letter said, "Dear Darius, I'm a young black man in a small town where people don't always respect me. I've worked at gas stations, grocery stores, and now I clean floors at a hotel. I was starting to feel invisible, like I didn't matter. Then I saw your video, and I felt seen. This notebook has pages where I wrote down every time I wanted to speak up but stayed quiet, until last week when a guest shouted at me, and I calmly asked him your question. And just like in your story, the whole room went silent. He apologized. I cried afterward, but not because I was sad, because I felt strong. Thank you for giving me that strength, Eli." Darius held the notebook gently, like something sacred. He knew then that the story wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been disrespected, but stayed silent. Everyone who finally chose to speak, not with anger, but with truth. Across the world, people shared stories using his sentence. From waiters in Paris to teachers in South Africa, from bus drivers in New York to market sellers in India. And somewhere along the way, something beautiful happened. The phrase became part of a small movement, a quiet one, not loud like protests or huge campaigns, just people reminding people that we all have hearts, that kindness costs nothing, that power doesn't make someone important, respect does. Even Preston Vale, the billionaire who once yelled without shame, began showing up at small events, listening instead of speaking. He helped fund scholarships for young people working in hospitality, but he never used it for credit. He just signed the forms and moved on. Some said he had changed, others weren't sure, but Darius, he didn't care about Preston's image. He cared about the people who had found their voices because of one small moment, one small question that cracked open the silence. One night as Darius sat on a bench outside the restaurant where it all began, he watched people come and go, some rich, some poor, some rushing, some laughing, and he smiled, knowing that somewhere out there, a person just like him might be preparing to say the words, calmly, clearly, bravely, not to hurt someone, but to stand tall, and to remind the world that dignity is not a reward. It's not something you earn only if you wear a suit. It belongs to everyone, even the quiet waiter in the corner, especially him, because sometimes the world doesn't change through shouting. It changes when one calm voice says something true and refuses to stay silent ever again.